Okay, I'll call this special regional council meeting to order. Developing meaningful relations with our Indigenous neighbors is a priority of the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality. As such, we are collaborating with First Nations governments and Indigenous organizations to develop a respectful and meaningful territorial acknowledgement. This work also presents an opportunity to learn more about the culture and history of the Indigenous people of our region. Please be advised that today's meeting is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Souls. All those in favor? Carried. Mr. McQuaig, I'll turn it over to you. We're at next steps for Town Square Renewal Project.
Yes. So in very simple terms, the purpose of this meeting is to, I guess, give you an update as to where we are with a little more information about the tenants in the town hall and where we stand with them as of today and how that affects the grand scheme of the design. You should be seeing a first page. So yes, we are here again. And we're just trying to make sure that the council and everybody else fully understands all of the different ramifications. We've made a few adjustments to the figures as we go. Very briefly, we still have the same team involved. Structural Solutions are structural, Ardale is architecture, Senesco is code and fire, and AES is doing electrical. On the timeline, we are still here. We have, yes, sorry.
Sorry, we're seeing a kind of a preview version, not the full presentation version.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wonder why that is. Okay, let me go back. I will stop share and then reshare. I wonder if that's the issue. I love technology. And you are still seeing which one are you seeing? Are you seeing the full screen? You seeing the right one now?
It's a bit better, but now for some reason it's only like a third of the screen size.
Okay, what if I put this here? It's still 1/3 of the screen size.
We're not seeing anything at the moment.
Okay, sorry. Let me. Oh.
You do have it, right?
That was really the wrong one. Now, we have lost track. Nobody pressed on that.
That's CJ.
I don't know what happened there. I lost you completely. Okay. Let's try this one more time. We go to there. Here. How's that?
Perfecto. Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So the same for sub-consultants are involved, and so we have structural, architectural, fire, electrical, and we're the prime consultants. We are here, so we are still at the point where we are ready to do the final design with all the details and everything else. And essentially, we are still waiting for some degree of feedback from council as to which direction they would like to proceed. So that part of this meeting is to help move that forward. So we want to reconfirm the key details associated with scenario 3 and some updated tenant feedback, and hopefully get some direction from council, maybe not today, but soon, as to where they want to go to. In simple terms, scenario 3, we were a little bit concerned that scenario 3 wasn't fully understood with all of the different details involved. So we just wanted to make sure everybody's on the same page with that. Very briefly, we started consulting with the tenants back in October and have been working with them off and on. And even last weekend, we had some further feedback from both the play school and the theater. So this is still developing as we go, but we've had more and more information as time moves on, and we're trying to present as much of it as we can. The main thing that all of the tenants asked for was additional space and improved layout and improved accessibility. And so that's what we're really focusing on. A very brief overview from previous presentations. There are 3 scenarios for renovating the town hall. Scenario 1 is the minimum renewal needs for the building. So all the walls stay in place and we're only moving walls or stairways or anything if it's a code requirement to meet today's code. This is obviously the least cost option. Option 2 includes all that we're doing in scenario 1, but we are improving the efficiency of the layout of the town hall operations by moving some walls. So it does cost a little bit more than scenario 1, but essentially we are keeping the overall footprint of what's being used by the town hall administration as the same. We're just moving departments around and moving some walls. And so it does cost a little bit more than scenario 1, but it does create some real improvements for the town hall section. Scenario 3 essentially revamps the entire usage of the building because all of the tenants, well, not all the tenants, but essentially the majority of the tenants have asked for increased floor space. The only way we accommodate that is if we completely rejig all the usage of the different tenants. So there's some spare space in the wrong place in the town hall administration, and we move into that. And then we move them out of some area and move the library into that area, and that frees up some space for the play school, and everybody plays. It's like the old 15 puzzle. You have to move everybody around to get there. But if we go with scenario 3, we're creating a bunch of spare floor space that allows the tenants to have extra space. Of course, this is the highest cost option because it's the most disruptive to everything. There's a table here, and please, if we look at this table, this is the list of what we had requests from all the different tenants. And some of the requests are available from any scenario, but some of the requests require scenario 3. So the main takeaway that I would like you guys to get is, for example, if you want a fully barrier-free theater, it's not available unless we go to scenario 3. There are definitely improvements we can make in access to disabled people and everything else, but barrier-free is a big thing. Also, as soon as you ask for additional space for storage, concession prep, and all this sort of stuff, then we are looking at, we have to make more space. And the only way to make more space is to move into someone else, so that everyone moves around and stuff like that. Soundproofing, I've just left it as possible in all 3. The main reason I've said that is because the truth is we need a lot more back and forth. A couple different tenants have asked about making it more soundproof when the theater is showing loud movies. We can certainly make it better without a huge cost, but like it or not, when they're showing very loud movies, then there'll always be some sound, and how far you go depends on how much money you spend, and so it needs some more work, but that can be done with all 3. With the library requests, the main thing is they want additional space, and again, it's not possible unless you go with scenario 3. Play school, exactly the same situation is happening. They've asked for some basic things: hand wash station, improved lighting, new outdoor picnic space. All of these can be done with any scenario, but if they want to go with a full daycare center, they will need more space. And if they do that, we have to go to scenario 3. Clubhouse, again, it's all the same as we go down. A lot of the basic stuff is available without any trouble with any scenario, but there are a few scenarios that only scenario 3 can accommodate. So please remember, scenario 3 is allowing for space for future tenant improvements. So even if you don't do the tenant improvements right away, if you don't go with scenario 3, you can never do them. Or if you do want to do them later, you will have to undo and redo a whole bunch of work in the town square administration building, which you probably don't want to do. The tenant costs, if we make them the space, and if we include everything that the tenants have asked for, as of, I'm going to say last Friday, we're looking at $2.7 million of extras that the tenants have asked for. Now, please remember, there's a few things about that number. First off, at least some of that you can probably get covered by grants because theaters and libraries and stuff do have access to grants, but those grants are somewhat limited. And so I can't speak today exactly how much, but probably north of $2 million if all of it is done. So the questions that we have to answer are scenario 1, scenario 2, scenario 3. Where do you want to go moving forward? Because when we get those answers, we can start moving on to the next phase of the design. And this is where the estimates are as of today. I realize these numbers have grown a little bit. We have adjusted them based on, well, inflation of anyone that's been looking at construction costs in the last 4 months, they have gone up a lot. And so we have included that. We've included for inflation, we've included for everything. And this is the total cost. Now, some of this cost can be covered by grant in each of them. And I'm sure Jay could give us far more information on that. But this is the worst case scenario. If everything is done and you get no grants, this is what it will cost. So please pay attention to these numbers. You can see right away there's a $5 million upcharge if you go to scenario 3 and you give all the tenants everything they've asked for. It's not necessary, but the other thing as well is if you say, well, we'll do scenario 3, but we won't do the tenant upgrades for a few years, please be aware that you will be leaving huge portions of the building vacant and unfixed for a period of time. And there will be some degree of lost costs because if you say, for example, we'll make the space to move the library in here, we won't do it just yet. It means we have to accommodate the heating and cooling in the library where it is now, and then redo that later when it moves into the other space. So there's some degree of extra costs if you do it that way. Not huge, but it's definitely there. Decisions made today will affect the next few decades. Scenario 1 and 2 cannot provide for future expansions. And scenario 3, all changes to tenant space do not need to happen immediately, but space must be left for these changes now, or they cannot be made in the future. I want to be really clear about this, that basically the decision you're making on 1, 2, or 3 is a 20-year decision or so. That's all I really wanted to hammer home. I know Jay's got some numbers if she wants to present them, and I am absolutely open to questions.
Councillor Penny?
You have any idea? So if we gave everything to the tenants that they were looking for, you said 2.7 million, but if we just made the space available, realizing that there would be extra costs down the road, but how much would it cost now if we just made the space available but didn't do any of the upgrades?
That would be the basic scenario 3 cost without the extra 2.7.
So it'd be that 22
22. So
less the 2.7.
Less than
it'd be
2.7.
plus. Okay, good enough.
So you're about 1.5 more than the scenario 2.
Oh, yeah. I thought he had said that number included if we gave everything, but it doesn't. So it'd be actually 24. So
No. So the
No, that's
22.
the 20.
Go ahead, John.
Okay. Sorry, the 22 includes everything if you get everything. If you do all of scenario 3 and you make space for it, but you don't include it, then it would be 19 and a half, roughly.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Councillor Gerwing?
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. The last presentation that we had, the numbers of scenario 3 reflected the increased space for tenants, but it was unfinished.
Yes.
Is what you're saying today, these numbers on scenarios 3 are reflecting the increased space for tenants, and it would be finished space ready for them to move into?
Yes. And to be brutally honest, we don't have the full, what they have asked for is not really fully fleshed out. So we've used basically square foot estimates. So there's a bit of leeway in there, but that is our best guess as of today. When the library asks, we want to use new space for this and everything else, and the theater wants things, we're guessing as to exactly what they're referring to and what they want because we haven't done the design, but that's our best guess. That would include finished space.
So one of the options I remember the theater asking for was in terms of fully accessible, They wanted a fully accessible catwalk. And so when I'm looking at your our page 13, under the Phoenix Theater, in scenario 3, under barrier free, it says that scenario 3, that would be accomplished. Would that include a fully accessible catwalk?
I can speak to that, Jack, if you want.
Yeah,
So
please.
these were some of the questions that we had around. So barrier free implies that anyone with any sort of challenge, whether it be visual, hearing, mobility, has access to the space. And we struggled with that one a lot, because a theater naturally has some barriers, being terraced and having catwalks and things like that. So we did go back to the stakeholders week before last and ask for some clarification. And that was one of the clarifications. We also asked them to prioritize their requests. So if they were asking for accessibility, were there certain areas that they felt it was more important to achieve that than others? So the theater did come back and they confirmed that, yes, they meant accessibility from a mobility perspective. And they did intend public spaces, including washrooms, lobby, green rooms, and stage. So not catwalks, not the booth, basically the spaces that would be most frequently visited by the public.
I'll add the challenge. The challenge with scenario 3 is potential scope creep. Because there's some assumptions being made right now. And that's the reason for going to a detailed design. But the concern, honestly, that I have with scenario 3 is affordability, and the fact that most likely any additions or costs associated with the work that's going to get done will be borne by the municipality at some point in time, if it's either now or later. And as you get into detailed design, some of those assumptions start to get flushed out, and an estimate real cost get attached. And we've already seen some communication come by just recently from some of the stakeholders or tenants that have confirmed some additional ideas and thoughts. So there's a likelihood that that would continue, right? And it comes down to how far and where does council, if they were to take scenario 3, for example, where do you draw the line? Because this right now, from an affordability perspective, none of the numbers, scenario 1, 2, or 3, are achievable with our reserves without any grant funding. So we would most likely, we would need to borrow. We're not asking council to proceed with the project right now. So that's not a decision council's making right now. It's which design do you want to go with? And the design's already budgeted into this year's budget, right? So that's already been budgeted as part of this process. So, but it's obviously you want to do 3 designs, you don't want to do 2 designs. You want to stick with the 1 design and refine that, and that's what flushes out those numbers. But the challenge is from an affordability perspective, even if you don't do the work currently, you're still $1.5 million more than the scenario 2. If you were to pick scenario 3, with the essentially potential $2.7 or $3 million price tag looming in the future at some point in time, which, like, as Jack had mentioned, in some cases, if you don't do some of that work up front, it's going to cost you more in the future to do it, because you're going to HVAC and whatnot would be required to be changed accordingly to deal with it. So that's a consideration that council needs to make as part of this discussion. And honestly, like I said, from an affordability perspective, scenario 3 is far reaching. It really is. It's a nice to have. It's future looking and whatnot. But given some assumptions around community growth and whatnot and costs, going into next year, there's a lot of unknowns. Everything we see and touch right now is costing us more money. So I can just say right now, status quo taxation from a tax levy perspective is going to go up next year. We just don't have, unless we were to cut something, right? Based on status quo services, because everything is more expensive, right? Cost to provide the service when it comes to personnel, fuels, materials, shipping. I mean, we've got the Public Works Fire Hall facility over there right now that we have a $1.7 million grant. We're hoping to get the foundation covered for about $600,000. The original tender came in at 1.5, right? So there's lots of stuff in the horizon. So from just an affordability and just a cost perspective, I need to throw that out for council to keep in mind, because scenario 1 and 2 needs to have, I said 2 has a little bit of, has some additional synergies based on the fact we're taking the wall down, you're going to put it up, might put it up in a different spot or arrange that. There's a $400,000 spread between 1 and 2, but when you get into 3, it's a real big, right? And from an affordability perspective, it starts to become challenging. We have to fund it.
Mr. McQuaig?
Thank you. I just wanted to add to it that when we were talking about leaving space open for a period of time, it's important to note that like right now, there's what we affectionately call the back 40, the storage area in the back of the town hall that's left vacant and nobody really cares because it's back there in the area that no one ever goes to. The areas that we would leave open and unfinished are right in front, right at the main entrance in the front. So it would be the public coming in would see, I mean, we would make the lobby look okay, but the public coming in would see the front of the building is unfinished for as long as it stays unfinished, which I realize it's not a huge deal, but like it or not, this is a showpiece in the whole town. And so people will come in and say, when are we finishing that? It's because they'll be reminded every time they come to town hall. So again, it may not be a huge deal, but it's there.
Councillor Gerwin?
I think another concern that I have is like outside of the Phoenix Theatre and the library, so not including those 2 organizations, the other tenants, you know, if they get a better deal somewhere, like they could just scoot on off, you know. So when we're thinking about renovating a space specific to their needs, like $10,000 for a panic room for the clubhouse. Well, if Northern Health decides that they're moving that program to another area, then like who's going to use that, right? And it's the same thing with the play school. If they do go to a full daycare situation, there's lots of grant funding out there for new builds. So I would just caution council to keep that in mind as well. To renovate, spend big dollars for tenants that can pretty easily move elsewhere just might be something to consider.
Mr. Barry, what? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to add, when it comes to a cost perspective, currently we've had a submission in for an application for the UBCM grant funding, which would provide a maximum of $6 million if successful for the maximum. For $6 million, it would be the grant funding. So if applied to these totals, scenario 1's 11,600,000, scenario 2 is 12 million, and scenario 3 is 16 million. So the reason why I bring that up is there's a possibility with that, if we were to be successful in the grant funding, is that the reserves could cover the cost of those 2 scenarios. At $16 million, we still are looking at borrowing to cover the cost of scenario 3. We were going to apply for an FCM grant, which we haven't applied for not yet, because as we looked into it more, and that's the one linked to the the greenhouse gas emissions and reducing your emissions by up to, have to be above 30%. And Jack had spoken to that in previous meetings. There's some hoops to jump through with that particular application. And interestingly enough, FCM actually requires you to borrow to apply to be successful with the grant, which even if you had the money, you still have to borrow. So, and even though you can stack the grant, you can't double dip, of course. So if we're successful with the UBCM grant, the difference that we'd be able to apply for with this other grant is minimal and not necessarily worth the tasks of jumping through the hoops to have to borrow through MFA and deal with the requirements of FCM. So that one's kind of sitting out at this point. And I just bring that up because we did bring that to the council at one point for approval to apply for, but we're holding off on that one currently after we found out more about that particular one. But again, I just can't stress enough the affordability piece moving forward as we look at the coming years.
Can you speak to how much money we have in reserves?
I don't have that number directly in front of me because it's a moving target. Trevor is away currently, but when we sat and met from a reserve perspective, the challenge we have is when we spent a certain amount of time over the previous weeks. Mayor, because the number for reserves could be including surplus, or you get statutory reserves or whatnot. We looked at from strictly from cash what can we utilize moving forward? And in order to do that, we had to look at our 20-year capital plan, and we had to take a look at that capital plan and really focus on the next 5 years, especially, and look at some assumptions around where the costs may escalate, right? From a financial perspective, we're in good shape, right? And always have been. The challenge is that they're escalating everywhere. And those funds could evaporate quite quickly. So we want to make sure that we're in a good financial shape to look after the organization, municipality, infrastructure moving forward, without saying, "Oh, we can afford this today," and in 2 years from now say, "Ooh, we need to borrow to fix something out there, to deal with the road, or to deal with an issue with water plant because we've overstretched." And we're in a position currently, and the numbers have grown even here, and we've pumped them up purposely with 15% inflation and soft costs, and looked at every which way, so that we're not providing a number that is misleading, for lack of better words. But again, everything we're touching is going up in price, and we're seeing that with individuals. We're seeing it in the grocery store. We're seeing it everywhere. We see it traveling out of town. So that's when we look at the capital plan and tried to factor in potential increases in paving work that's down the road and work that was planned for other facilities, the Public Works Fire Hall facility, which needs significant work moving forward. We just looked at, in terms of what is a reasonable approach, and we, like I said, that scenario 3 just becomes risky from a reserve perspective, where either which way we look at, we'd need to borrow, most likely to fund it.
Even if we chose scenario 1, we would be looking at borrowing.
If we receive the grant, we should be okay.
I guess my concern is that there's so many unknowns here. There's an unknown about cost escalation when we're doing this. There's an unknown about exactly what the number is that we have in reserves, and there's an unknown what grants we could receive from the government, and the interest rate, of course, on monies that we would borrow in the future. We don't know what the interest rate's going to be when it comes time to do this. So there's quite a few unknowns here with any of these scenarios. So I guess that's what I'm looking at here.
So there isn't an unknown in terms of what we have in reserve. I just don't have that number in front of me. And it depends on which number you want. What I'm saying is that we're not sure what the impact of those reserves would be. We know what, from a cash flow perspective, based on our 5-year plan, 20-year capital plan included, what that flow looks like. The challenge is that there's other ways to impact it. So providing a council with that number right now, for example, it really is just a number, because the other number that you factor in is what's the spend look like outside of this project moving forward. The design piece, it's important to proceed with the design piece because that helps firm up the price. That helps firm up your pricing. Our intent, we're in communication with a construction manager to assist with that process, because they help kind of provide that real-time market condition. This is what it would cost. Because no disrespect to engineers and whatnot when they do this, but at the same time, they're providing information, the best information they can at the time. Where similar to when we were doing the Rec Center facility and working with Bird Construction at the time, you actually have people who are in the construction industry that help price out what specific costs are to do something. Or they might say, yes, it's fine to put that stairway here, but if we moved it 5 feet, did this, you might save yourself $5,000 or something like that, right? So the intent though with the design piece, and again, like I said earlier, it is that portion is approved in this year's budget to proceed with design. Is what that allows us to do is firm up the pricing as part of a detailed design, because right now we're dealing with Class D cost estimates and assumptions.
Very well. Councillor Souls.
So I like it that we're at this. I like it being at this stage because there's actually a lot of option before us. But the idea, the fact that we've got funding for our planning and design, I think that it's important to move forward with it too. One of the things that I struggle with is, as I listen to our community and people, I think that the question that people are asking without asking it is whether or not there's a future, whether or not we've got a good future ahead as a community. And I think that if we look at our past efforts, I recall I was on council in 2011 when we decided to make the rec center move forward in the way it was. And I look back at that, and that was a risky decision in a sense for us as a community, but that's been a great, great benefit to us overall. And of course, we are still paying for it, but we actually had the wind behind us for quite a few of the early years. And so it's not as though that is a debt that is weighing our community down and that we can't manage. I think that when I look at the moving forward, as far as the future goes, one way or another, we have to have a municipal office, a municipal system. And one way or another, we're going to, and I believe that it's good to have one. And so in the context of just having decided that this building is one that we will fix up, that it makes sense to fix it up rather than build a new building, I am really inclined to do a good job of this building and make it as functional as possible when we're done. I'm more inclined now that I see the numbers and I agree that that's a prudent way to develop numbers, because the idea of building in contingency based on inflation and that is, I get it. The volatility of today's world is really important to do, but you can't let that stop you from actually moving forward. So we actually have a very good municipality and very good components within it. And I think that this component needs to be brought up to speed. As Jack had mentioned in the beginning, we're actually talking a 20-year decision, not a next year taxation decision or the year after, even though I realize that they could impact it. Now, from a reserve point of view, and how it affects the reserves, regardless of whether we have to borrow or not to do level 3 or option 3, the reserves are going to carry the bulk of it. It's not as though you have to borrow $20 million to do this project. It's not the case. The reserves will take most of it. If we have to borrow a bit to finish doing a good job and end up with a good asset that's good for 20 years, that meets the needs, I'm more inclined to not worry about the borrowing of the relatively small amount that's needed. And just where this is what I'm pulling out of our conversation and my own history and our own community.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councilor Gerwin.
So seeing as how we're missing 2 people, and we didn't get this information till just right now, I'm wondering, and I know everybody would like some sort of a decision to help move this forward, but could we table the decision-making until like tonight's meeting? Because we'll hopefully all be here tonight, or at least one more. I'm not sure of Councillor Roper's attendance. But maybe Councillor Andrews would have time to view the recording of this meeting and come up to speed, and then would have some input or something.
And we can also bring it back for not to say we don't have another special, but it can be. I mean, we understand. I mean, we chatted about this and we met about it last week in terms of the information going to council. Again, you're not making a decision on the construction, spending that type of money, but a design is a hefty price too. So at the end of the day, we don't want to have to do more than one detailed design. We'd like to stick with one. So that said, we want council, whatever information council needs and time to make an informed decision is perfectly fine, understandable to have the other 2 councillors here too. So just it doesn't have to be tonight if say, for instance, Councillor Andrews and or Roper don't have the ability to review the recording before the 5 o'clock, for example.
Councilor Gerwin.
Oh, sorry. Just one more question too, just to remind me, it's probably in my notes somewhere, but the numbers that presented today for scenario 1, 2, and 3, we still have the outside of the building that's separate from these numbers, right? Or is that including,
I'll include it.
it's separate? So what are those numbers, please?
So
It's all
So
included.
the numbers
It's
before you
inclusive,
include
it's
that.
inclusive of the numbers that you have here. This is all in.
We're calling it the worst case
We're
scenario.
calling it all in. Yeah, so
So
it's the
that's-
roof, it's the build, it's the outside cladding, it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, it's
yeah, no,
removing
those are all in.
filling
It's
the
the
holes.
cladding. And to be blunt, we're trying to make it a little bit simple right now to keep the things that are just confusing the whole issue. And we discussed, do we still want to go down to the multiple options for the mechanical system? But the answer is, if the cheapest long-term mechanical system involves doing the exterior, we're just assuming that. That's the highest upfront cost, but the lowest cost long-term. So these numbers include that. So the exterior is being done. So if let's assume several ifs, if the funding doesn't come through on the grant, so it doesn't happen at all, and you can't get any funding and everything else, you can knock, and I'm doing some math in my head now, but approximately 2.5 million off this price if you don't do the exterior and you go to a different mechanical system. But the grants are tied to that, and it's all, again, now we're back into the weeds with all the details. But it's
So the detail, so the detailed design would provide you what, as they said, that worst case scenario or best case now when it comes to scope of work, right? That's the roof, the preferred HVAC system, the cladding on the exterior, et cetera. But what
Stop you
happens
right
is-
there. Then
Yeah.
these numbers include what is the preferred HVAC system? Because we were presented with two scenarios. So which one did you choose to be included in these numbers?
we choose the preferred system that costs more money up front.
And is that with the heat pump?
Yes.
Yes.
Is that the one?
Yeah. It's a dual source heat pump.
So I'm just going to take us back here. Councillor Burling, you made a good point about Councillor Roper and Councillor Andrews being here and having an opportunity to review what Mr. McQuaig has said. So what I'll do is I'll ask for a motion. Do we defer this? Go around the table here and just take a vote and see if we can defer this until the other councillors have had a chance to review this. So if you'll make that motion, I will second it. All in favor? All right, so we'll defer this until Councillor Roper and Councillor Andrews have had a chance to review this video. Anything further, Mr. McQuaig?
Just to be clear, because I know that Scott made allusions to it, but essentially, if we do the detailed design, there's still room to change later. We can include parts of the design as a alternative price on the tendering and everything else, but then we have hard numbers. This is a Class D estimate, which means there's leeway, and there's no getting around it. But for example, if you're saying, well, do we really need a flying stage catwalk or something that accommodates whatever? Sure, we can include that in the design if that's what you want. And then if you find out, oh my God, that costs $500,000, it's just not worth it, you can take that out again later. Now that's an extreme example, but essentially what I'm saying is if you do the design up front, you will have hard numbers for each of them. And on some level, you will have a shopping list to say, yes, yes, no, no, yes. But you can't get the shopping list until you make it. If you like the overall numbers and you say, we like scenario 3 or we like scenario 2, then we can proceed with the design and get those numbers. But if you're saying, well, we'd like to have the shopping list, but we only want to do scenario 2, that's not going to happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any more comments? Very well. We'll have another meeting at a later date. Mr. Barry with Mr. Councillor Roper and Councillor Andrews. Thank you, Mr. McQuaig. If there's nothing else,
Okay.
I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.